Europe has a big problem. He has been on the continent for years. It's drying. Europe has been experiencing severe drought for years. All over on the continent, groundwater levels have been low since 2018. They don't change at extreme weather events such as local floods, although they may give the false impression is that the situation with water in Europe does not look so bad. In 2020, in Geophysical Research Letters, an article by Eva Borgens was published in which the author documented significant water scarcity in Central Europe in the summer months of 2018 and 2019. From that over time, researchers look at the problem much more carefully. Within the EU, scientists used the Global Gravity-Based Groundwater Product, G3P, project satellite gravimetry for observing the world's groundwater resources, and they have documented their changes in recent years. Data analyses by Torsten Meyerger and Andreas Kwas from the Institute of Geodesy of the Technical University of Graz, 2 Graz. They clearly indicate that there has been no increase in water levels in Europe ground. Researchers warn that this may have a very negative and far-reaching effects on the entire continent. The effects of the prolonged drought were evident in Europe summer 2022. Riverbeds were drying up, numerous bodies of water were slowly disappearing, and entire ecosystems associated with them. Dry soil is also a big problem for agriculture and energy. Nuclear power plants in France lacked water cooling, and hydroelectric power plants also could not meet at full capacity your function. Hence, energy shortages were recorded throughout the continent. How 2 Graz surveyors can use data from space for accurate groundwater calculations. The heart of the G3P project, there are twin satellites called Tom and Jerry. The distance between them is important, amounting to approximately 200 kilometers. The one in the back, Tom, can't catch up with it in the front, Jerry, so they were given a name in referring to the cartoon characters. The distance between satellites is constant and precise measured. If they are flying over a mountain, the satellite in front is initially faster than the one at the back due to the increased weight below it. After passing the mountain, it slows down a bit again, but the satellite in the back accelerates as soon as it reaches the top. After passing, their relative speed is set again. These distance changes at high masses, they are the main measurement variables for determining the field gravitational Earth and are determined with micrometer accuracy. In one day, satellites orbit the Earth 15 times, which it means that the full surface of our planet is imaged within a month. 2 Graz can therefore provide a complete gravity map of the Earth every month. Effort: the computational is quite large. Distance measurements between satellites are performed every 5 seconds, which is about 500,000 readings per month. On this basis we then determine maps of the gravitational field, explains Torsten Meyerger. However, the gravity map itself is not enough to determine groundwater level. Satellites show all mass changes on Earth and know they make a distinction between sea, lakes, and groundwater. Torsten Meyerger and his team, knowing the total mass, subtract changes in mass from it: rivers and lakes, soil moisture, snow, and ice. Finally, all that remains is groundwater. Such calculations require extensive cooperation international. Therefore, experts with data about weight of different types of water from Austria, Germany, Switzerland, France, Spain, Finland, and the Netherlands. The effects of this cooperation show that the water situation in Europe has now become very uncertain. Torsten Meyerger did not expect this on such a large scale. A few years ago I would never have thought there would be water a problem in Europe, especially in Germany and Austria. Here, actually there are problems with water supply. We need to keep this in mind, scientist explains. Further documentation is needed, according to researchers. Ongoing drought, and this requires a continuous satellite mission in space and beyond international cooperation. That is why the European Space Agency ESA and the American equivalent of NASA will jointly continue research as part of MAGIC project, Mass Change and Geoscience International Constellation. Unexpected effects of drought from the 6th century. It's thanks to her Islam flourished. At the beginning of the 6th century, the areas of the Arabian Peninsula experienced the most intense drought in millennia. New research indicates that the disaster he brought down the Himyarite kingdom and combined with unrest, political and war, destabilized the region, thus creating good conditions for the spread of the newly emerging religion, Islam. 100 years after Jesus' death, Christianity was still scarce, a well-known religion with a small number of followers. However, Islam needed less than 50 years after its founding to become the dominant religion in large part world. An article published in Science magazine proves that the impact on development climatic conditions in southern Arabia had new ideas. In the period from the 3rd to the 6th century in what is now Yemen, the Himyarite kingdom dominated. The inhabitants of that time used it for cultivation, the role of dams and terraced hillsides. Their irrigation system was ahead of its own era and transformed the semi-desert into fertile soil, which allowed the rulers extend the influence of your country throughout Arabia. In the 6th century AD, a series of crises weakened the Himyarite kingdom to so much so that it was conquered by Aksum, today's Ethiopia, even though the countries were separated by the Red Sea. Destabilization then affected the whole thing Arabia. The causes of the Himyarites' problems have so far been the subject speculation. Now Professor Dominic Flateman from the University of Basel has found new evidence in Hodi Cave, located on the other side of the Peninsula Arabic. The evidence turned out to be stalagmite. Growth rates of similar the formation in the caves depends on humidity and rainfall. Every drop that reaches the cave ceiling and then falls and CO creates the structure is carried with it by dissolved calcite, which settles after landing up on stalagmite. The ratio of oxygen isotopes in the rock provides further information on climatic conditions when the material was deposited. Professor Flateman had the opportunity to examine the composition of the stalagmite catalogued under the name H12 from Hodi Cave. Even with the naked eye, you can see from the stalagmites that in those times must have experienced a very dry period lasting several decades, says Professor Flateman. More thorough research confirmed that this was the most intense drought during 2,650 years of stalagmitic growth. The study of stalagmitic sediments itself is too inaccurate to specify a specific date for this extreme drought. However, the proportions of uranium decay from the period of drought, they place it at the beginning of the 6th century. Unable to determine from stalagmite itself whether the drought coincided with the fall of the Himyarite kingdom, much less whether it was caused by Professor Flateman checked the historical sources and search other climate tips at the time. Among the sources Flateman reached for were data on water levels in the Dead Sea and dust deposition in Lake Nir in Iran. Everything indicates that around 520 AD Middle East drought struck. In 520, the source of Siloam in Jerusalem is reported it dried. Meanwhile, during that period, rainfall intensified in Turkey, which it was caused by the northward shift of storm routes in the eastern parts of the Mediterranean Sea. Water is the absolute most important resource. It is obvious that less rainfall, and especially several years of extreme drought, it may destabilize a sensitive semi-desert kingdom, explains Flateman. Professor Flakeman believes that the kingdom's irrigation system Himeyarites were probably particularly susceptible to droughts. To the current 1/10 of thousands of workers were required to maintain the irrigation network. This means everything that could have negatively affected their health for sure. It also caused large losses in food production. At the same time, there was a war between the Empire Byzantine and Sassanids, which caused regional disruptions in trade. The Himeyarite kingdom finally collapsed in 525 AD, and Arabia felt the effects of war and poverty for another century. The people living in those areas were experiencing great difficulties due to hunger and war. This meant that Islam had become susceptible ground. People were looking for new hope, something that could reunite them as a society, says Professor Flakeman. The new religion offered this highlights.
you.